There are forces of good and forces of evil at work in the world today. What are these forces? Who is responsible for the good? And who is responsible for the evil? Richard Schaff talks about current events which are rarely discussed by the mainstream media, events that affect us all. This program seeks to identify, to inform, and to equip the believer for what's ahead. Welcome to What in the World is Going On?
This is What in the World is Going On. I'm your host, Richard Schaff. The program is sponsored by Lincoln Log Homes. We are pro-Christian, pro-American, pro-life, pro-Second Amendment, and here by the grace of God. We're also on YouTube. What in the World is Going On by Richard Schaff. Same program as you're going to get here, but 24/7. I see where the stock market has entered a correction stage as the coronavirus cases have increased. And that's what we're going to talk about today. The economy is the number one thing that Trump is going for him in the upcoming election. Normally is for any incumbent president. But even those that don't always agree with everything that Trump says or does, credit him with a plus on the economy. And certainly if something's affecting the economy, it's going to affect his chances in the upcoming election. He's had Russia. He's had the spaced-out special counsel Mueller. He's had impeachment by the Democrat House clowns. And now he's got the virus. That's right. And it's real, and it's spreading. Over 83,000 stricken worldwide in 47 countries. Over 2,000 dead. All the continents hit except the Antarctic. And now the Dems are trying to blame Trump for the coronavirus. That's right. They've tried it all. But I want to point out to you there's some growing concern about the 2020 economy, and it's justified, folks. Republicans have been counting on a roaring economy to power President Trump and GOP congressional candidates on Election Day. They're now growing nervous because of the economic havoc reckoned by the virus. Earlier this month, GOP senators were riding high after Trump's acquittal on impeachment charges in the Senate. Now they're wrestling with predictions of an economic slowdown that could upend the political calculus for 2020. There's a potential to really affect the economy, not only this country negatively, but throughout the world. That is a recognized quote by Senator John Boozman of Arkansas. He added, and I quote, that GOP colleagues discussed the potential fallout from the coronavirus at an all-day retreat in Washington on Wednesday, this past Wednesday, the 27th of February. I think we're in a position to do a good job of combating it, he said. We just don't really know what to expect as far as the full impact. He added, what I believe is we should be ready for the worst and essentially whatever money it takes, spend it to protect the American public. Republican lawmakers say the strength of the economy along with national security are the biggest factors determining whether an incumbent president wins re-election. GOP senators worry the strength of the U.S. economy, which a couple of weeks ago had pointed in favor of Trump winning a second term. They recognize that now there's some doubts as the corona cripples supply chains in China and adds economic tremors throughout the European Union, and certainly here at home. At the end of the day, elections, especially re-elections for presidents, are largely based on the economy and people's sense of security. And a virus like this can have an impact on both. That's a quote from Republican Senator Kevin Cramer. Forecast firm Oxford Economics projects economic growth will slow to a 1.9% in the first quarter of 2020 as a result of the virus. The firm has already lowered its forecast for the year from 2.5 to 2.3%. Republicans concerned are fueled by uncertainty over how quickly the virus may spread across the U.S. and how a vaccine is not expected before the November election. China, where the virus outbreak originated, has imposed quarantines and urged its citizens to avoid crowded places, resulting in eerie images of empty sidewalks, roads, and subway cars in Chinese cities like Beijing and Shanghai. Japanese Prime Minister Abe announced last Thursday that his government will ask all schools to close for March in an effort to contain the virus. South Korean officials on Thursday reported to their American counterparts more than 503 new infections in the past 24 hours. This according to a lawmaker briefed on the situation. Where's it going to end, folks? How much worse will it get? How will it disrupt supply chains, the workforce? In a global economy, an issue like this can very easily be pretty dramatic. It is, and it will be. Republicans say that if the situation gets worse, it could certainly have an impact on the economy and likely on the election as well, depending on how long it lasts. Democrat leaders have pounced on the situation, arguing the administration will not adequately be prepared. Republican lawmakers last Thursday condemned Democrats, arguing they're trying to score political points from the crisis. Democrat leaders in this town seem to be cheering for a disaster, said one senator. That senator had to be Republican Senator Kramer. Republicans acknowledge the very real threat to the economy and their own electoral prospects in November as a result of the coronavirus. Now, let's look back a little bit. I'm going back to Tuesday, the 25th of February. I get one of the sources of my material on all subjects is today's intel. This goes back to February 25th. That's Tuesday. And on the virus. Iran's death toll from the virus rose to 16 on Tuesday. That was the highest gain outside of China per capita, increasing its international isolations as dozens of countries from South Korea to Italy have accelerated emergency measures to curb the epidemic's global spread. Again, Iran has the most cases outside of China on a per capita basis. The White House is asking Congress for $2.5 billion to respond to the coronavirus illness known as COVID-19. This has killed more than 2,600 people in mainland China. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi called the request inadequate. Schumer wanted even more. If you watched the president's address, you saw he made reference to it. And by the way, Iran's deputy health minister confirmed on Tuesday that he's tested positive for the new virus amid a major outbreak in the Islamic Republic. As new cases of the coronavirus spiked on two continents, the World Health Organization warned last Monday, a week ago, that the world was not ready for a major outbreak, even as it praised China's aggressive efforts to wrest the epidemic under control. They're trying. I'm not sure that we get factual information from China on everything to do with it, but they are trying. Then let's come up to February 26th, Wednesday's intel report that I got. I'm going to reference it here. The United States told Americans on Tuesday, the 25th, to begin preparing for the coronavirus to spread within the country as outbreaks in Iran, South Korea, and Italy escalated, and fears that the epidemic would hurt global growth rattle markets. Asia reported hundreds of new virus cases on Wednesday, including an American soldier stationed in South Korea. This as the United States warned of a pandemic. The disease spread in Europe, and Brazil confirmed Latin America's first infection. Thailand reported 3 new cases of the virus on Wednesday, all this recent, past week, taking total infections there to 40. This from their health ministry. He was criticizing patients for not disclosing their travel history in their country. And then the last one I'll reference, today's intel was last Friday, this past Friday, the 28th. Here we've got a record of the day before and most of this past week. U.S. stocks opened sharply lower on Friday as investors dumped their equities, and it ended Friday down bad, big time, folks. This amid a spreading coronavirus outbreak, which has raised fears of a possible global recession. Coronavirus panic set world market shares skidding again this past Friday, putting them on a course for the worst weekly close since the 2008 global financial crisis, with almost $6 trillion wiped from their market value so far this past week. Hopes the virus could be contained to China vanished as infections spread rapidly around the world. Countries started stockpiling medical equipment, and investors took flight in expectation of a global recession. Mexico's government said on Friday it had detected the first case of the coronavirus infection in 2 men who had recently traveled to Italy, making the country the second Latin American country to register the virus. And California is monitoring more than 8,400 people who arrived on commercial flights. They're monitoring them for the virus symptoms. And as I said, Iran's first vice president for Women and Family Affairs is the latest Iranian official who mentioned that he personally had been contaminated by it. At least 7 officials in Iran have tested positive for the coronavirus. It's all over the world, folks. It's spreading all over the world. Prime Minister Abe from Japan announced Thursday that Japan's closing its schools now through April in a bid to halt this virus. And here in the U.S., a senior U.S. health official told officials that the coronavirus that is spreading globally is unlikely to disappear next year and that many more cases should be expected in the U.S. This according to a source who was briefed Friday the 28th, this past Friday. Now, Trump covered this in a news conference this past Wednesday. I don't know whether you watched it or not. I had the pleasure of being able to see it. And, despite a hostile press, Trump's, I guess you'd call it his virus conference, hit the right notes. He held his press conference this past Wednesday, the 26th of February, to discuss the coronavirus. And although many in the assembled press wanted to play gotcha, boy, that was humorous to watch, our president struck a great balance between relaxed and serious and refused to play the media's game. It was a perfect message, and manner to reassure a nation that while nothing serious is happening right now, our federal government will be there should the situation change. Trump explained that Vice President Mike Pence will be taking over to be the point person on the coronavirus issue. When Pence was governor in Indiana, he dealt with the MERS episode. That was back in 2014. So he's already got executive experience in managing an infectious disease. He also presents as an incredibly steady and competent person. It's kind of reassuring to all of us. When Trump spoke, he handed the microphone over to Pence when he was done. Then it went to Alex Azar, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and Dr. Annie Schmidt. She's the principal deputy director of the CDC, and Dr. Tony Fauci, the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases at the NIH. All of those speakers, including Trump himself, want to make several points clear. First, Trump's January decision to refuse entry to some planes arriving from China, and by the way, the Democrats lambasted him as being xenophobic for this. Anyway, his delaying the planes bought America precious time to get into systems and some systems in place and to work on ways to limit exposure and treat patients. Number 2, the federal government's working closely with state and city governments to have action plans in case the disease escalates. They noted that a vaccine probably won't be ready until the next flu season, after the election. There is an antiviral drug already being tested in randomized trials, and that may work against this version of the virus. And they pointed out that nobody in the federal government is panicking, but they're all working together to get systems in place in case the situation changes. He noted that he is working closely with President Xi of China because the latter is desperate to end the disease. In fact, they spoke 3 times the past Thursday by phone. We've got 42 cases in America where cruise ship passengers who caught the illness here brought it here directly. We don't want to confuse these with other cases that are reported. Trump noted that he's perfectly willing to take more money if Congress wants to give it, especially after fighting with Congress to get money for the wall. The Democrats are behaving shamelessly in politicizing this issue and panicking Americans instead of working together to fight an infectious illness, this illness that doesn't know any party lines. It's a shame what they're trying to do. We'll have more on that later in the program. We have a senator, John Barrasso of Wyoming. He's not only a senator, but he's also a medical doctor. And he points out that the U.S. virus response certainly should be bipartisan. The fight against the coronavirus should be a bipartisan effort and commitment. And he notes it's disturbing to see Democrats like Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi politicizing it. He noted this last Thursday. As I said, he's also a physician. I'm quoting Dr. Barrasso. My focus is on the health of the American people. He said this on Fox News America's newsroom. I'm quoting again. It's disturbing to see how it's politicized, as Chuck Schumer has done on the floor of the Senate, and how the Democrats are doing in South Carolina, where they're trying to play politics in an area where we should be focused on public health and safety. Barrasso said he's been at all of the briefings on the virus, but he hasn't seen Schumer at any of them. He noted, and I quote, "We need to be focused on public health, not politics, like the Democrats are trying to do." Last Wednesday, Schumer slammed President Trump for his administration's response to the outbreak, accusing it of having been caught, quote, flat-footed. Pelosi, meanwhile, called the response chaotic. Barrasso said he agrees with Trump's commitments on Wednesday, and that was when Trump had the news conference, that the United States is the most prepared nation in the world, but Americans must continue to be vigilant. When you look at a country the size of ours with this population, it's impossible to seal the entire nation, a quote from Senator Barrasso. The president was right with the early travel restrictions, and he may have to do more as more countries are involved. He added that he thinks it's the right decision for Trump to put Vice President Mike Pence in charge of handling the government's efforts. There's a lot of work to do, he said. We're ever vigilant. It can turn quickly. I think we're in the right position right now to deal with what could be a worldwide threat. And a few coronavirus updates. The World Health Organization raises the global risk from high to very high, and they did it this past week. And of course, as I mentioned, U.S. equity markets continued plummeting, and they did this through Friday, with the Dow Jones Industrial Average suffering its worst week since the financial crash of 2018. It was down more than 3,500 points last week from the Monday beginning. At midday Friday, the Dow had fallen more than 10% for the week as the S&P 500 and NASDAQ similarly tumbled. Some facts on the economy. The Dow plunges 10% from the peak and enters correction after the largest one-day point drop in history as coronavirus fears fuel the worst week on Wall Street since the Great Recession of 2008. U.S. major stock indexes closed down more than 4% for the day on Thursday, and Friday was a big day down also. Markets have now entered correction or declines from peaks of more than 10%. The Dow dropped over 1,190 points. That's the index's largest one-day point drop in its history. It's worldwide. It's affecting us, and we don't know exactly where it's going to end. We do know that financial gains deepen as nearly 60 countries report the virus. A deepening health crisis became an economic one, too, as the virus outbreak snapped financial markets, emptied shops and businesses, and put major cities and events off limits. The list of countries hit by the illness edged towards 60 as Mexico, Belarus, Lithuania, New Zealand, Nigeria, Azerbaijan, Iceland, and the Netherlands reported their first cases. The threats to livelihood was increasing as worrisome as the threat to lives. The latest report shows the new virus has infected over 83,000 people globally in 47 countries, every continent except the Antarctic. 2,800 deaths as the global stocks fall again on fears of the virus impact on the economy. What does it affect? Well, we know about international travel. We've seen that. But domestically, people stay home. No, they don't go shopping. They don't travel locally. Even some work from home if they can. They're not out spending money. They're not out helping the economy. Economists have forecast global growth will slip up to 2.4% this year, the slowest since the Great Recession of 2008, and down from earlier expectations that were close to 3%. For the United States, estimates are falling to a low as 1.7% growth this year, It was just a few weeks ago. Now it's down 2.3% in 2019. Also, the worst week the markets have had since the 2008 market crisis. Keep that in mind, folks. That's where we're at today. But if the disease known as COVID-19 becomes a global pandemic, economists expect the impact could be much worse, with the U.S. and other global economies falling into recession. If we start to see more cases in the U.S., if we start to see people not traveling domestically, if we start to see people stay home from work and from stores, then I think the hit is going to get substantially worse. That from Gus Fauncher, an economist at PNC Financial. As anxiety mounted, so did the economic fallout from the virus. And this virus threatens to end the world air travel boom as we know it. Airlines have been cutting hundreds of thousands of flights because of the virus travel restrictions. Carriers are also waiving change and cancellation fees for some routes because of the illness. U.S. domestic demand has been strong. It's been a revenue dryer and now be put to the test. The rapid spread of the new virus is testing airlines and other travel companies, certainly cruise lines, this with a risk that had been nearly unthinkable over the past decade. A broad decline in travel demand is what it's all experiencing. Air travel demand has been growing at twice the pace of the global economy, but that bright spot is now at risk. U.S. airlines and other travel stocks have tumbled more than the broader market share this past week as big conferences were canceled and fears that the customers might just opt out of trips because of the spreading virus outbreak. The NYSE ARCA Airline Index, which tracks 16 carriers in North America and Latin America, as well as European budget carrier Ryanair, is shown 20% down this past week. It's putting it on pace for the biggest weekly percentage drop since October 2008. That was during the last recession. American Airlines share fell 7.7%, a new low since it started trading after its 2013 merger with U.S. Airways. United Air suspended its full-year guidance this week because of the virus. They lost 2.4% to close to a two-year low. Delta stocks fell 2.8% to end at more than a year low. Deutsche Bank on Thursday downgraded American, Alaska, Delta, Sprint, JetBlue, and United Air stocks to hold from buy, saying it will become increasingly more likely that the spread of the virus will disrupt travel patterns way beyond China itself. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention on Wednesday advised the public to avoid all non-essential travel to South Korea. Saudi Arabia on Thursday announced it will temporarily suspend the entry of foreigners for pilgrimage and tourism purposes. You know, that's a great goal for many Muslims for their annual pilgrimage. Air travel demand this year will fall for the first time in over a decade and cost airlines more than $29 billion in revenue. This according to the International Air Transport Association. Airlines have already canceled more than 200,000 flights, mostly to and from and within China, because of the virus. Now they're modeling other changes and scrambling to keep up with changing restrictions. And that is the latest report from this past week. I want to point something out to you. This virus could explode in the U.S., just like it's done in Italy. Though novel 2019 virus cases in the U.S. have so far ticked up in fits and starts, experts on deadly diseases say Americans should be prepared to see an overnight boom in cases that mirror the skyrocketing outbreaks that we've seen just recently in Italy and South Korea. At last count from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, there were 60 confirmed cases from 2019 in the U.S. 14 patients came through the American healthcare system after traveling to China or having close contact with someone who did. The rest were either repatriated individuals who fled the vicinity of the virus origin in China on the State Department chartered planes, or else were rescued from the disastrous Diamond Princess cruise ship outbreak. Incidentally, that was a calamity and very poorly handled, according to many sources. I'm referring to the quarantine on the Diamond Princess in Tokyo. In Italy, officials have not been able to trace the origin of infections, which skyrocketed from 4 a week ago on Friday to more than 528 by this last Thursday, killing now at least 14 people. While each country faces its own health and containment challenges, experts say there's little reason to believe the U.S. won't soon face a similar virus surge, even as President Trump on Wednesday urged calm and put Vice President Mike Pence in charge of the containment. Quarantine on that cruise ship, they note, was perhaps the most stupid idea seen in recent years. Ultimately, hundreds of people were infected on the ship, which until this week's developments in South Korea represented the single largest outbreak outside of China. And this before they could even disembark the cruise ship. You see, it spreads pretty rapidly because of the ease from which it can pass on the virus through respiratory droplets and surface spread. This, according to the medical director at Halifax International. You can see from the situation in that large church group at Dae down in South Korea, especially how it spreads in close-knit situations where numbers grow. They grow rapidly from, in that case, from 30 to well over 1,000 in less than a week. In that South Korean church, the country now has 1,146 cases. There's every possibility this could happen in the U.S., pointing to the outbreaks in Iran and Italy and the ease of transatlantic travel. I want to point out in closing what is a tragedy and the point of why I'm bringing this to you and what we need to watch for. The Democrats and the virus. Truth is hard, propaganda is cheap. The Democrats, once again, have shown how they can truly lose their minds. For years, they've wailed about how our borders should be open, how there should be no walls. When President Trump 6 weeks ago banned travelers from China, they called him a racist. Of course they did. But now that the virus has spread, they're blaming him, accusing him of his anemic response. Wrong, folks. Our country has a pandemic plan in place no matter who's president. But Trump has been on the case since China informed the world of the virus breakout. A task force to address this virus has been put in place for at least a month. As I mentioned, Trump talked with the president of China 3 times on the phone this past Thursday. Now the Dems have accused Trump of cutting the budget of the CDC and the NIH. Even Associated Press shows that it did not. He had proposed some cuts, but they never went into effect. And there's a standing congressional fund for all health emergencies. But the Democrats don't care about facts. They live for any crisis they can weaponize for an assault on our president. They're as shameless as they are calculating. As always, they believe they can fool the American people and their lies won't be exposed. Thomas Sowell was exactly right when he said, and I quote, it is usually futile to try to talk facts and analysis to people who are enjoying a sense of moral superiority in their own ignorance. Of course, these Dems have an army of like-minded fellow travelers in the media. Did you see Gail Collins, who in her New York Times column said the virus should be called Trump virus, as if the president created it in the Oval Office and disseminated it far and wide? See how depraved they are? Bottom line, they're hoping for a massive pandemic because they believe that it would bring about the defeat of Trump in November. Not one of them has offered any plan of their own to combat the disease. Of course they haven't. It's not occurred to any of them to offer to work with the administration. No, never. They obviously are hoping for an outbreak worthy of a horror film. Thousands of deaths will not distress them if it takes Trump down. Like all these lefties who have been hoping for a recession, one that would really hurt Trump. Actress Patrice Arquette called on her Instagram followers all last weekend to spread the word about an economic shutdown scheduled for March 2nd. She said, March 2, there's an economic shutdown. She captioned, don't purchase anything on that day. Let's show them what could really happen. An epidemic of illness is even better in their minds. They can hardly contain their glee at the mere prospect of such a catastrophic event. This is what they're pointing to, folks. Some of the crowd that campaigned for open borders and massive unchecked immigration is now angry that Trump has allowed the virus into the U.S. Of course, it's all Trump's fault. These sanctuary cities are accusing Trump of poor judgment, but they're usually the ones that are filthiest and so subject to disease. Trump is the target. It's all Trump's fault. You and I know better, folks. But many of the uninformed, after hearing it by the liberal media, will start to believe that, and it could have an effect on our election. Not only effect on our election, effect on our future, on the future of our republic, on the future of our country. Particularly, folks, when you see what the opposition is putting on the other side. Pray for our country. Pray for our president. Goodbye until next week.